Wouldn't it be nice to have more time for a little bit of self care? Yes. The ultimate form of self care is practicing composure, being able to pause and breathe and regulate ourselves no matter what is happening in front of us is the ultimate self care. It's far better for our mental health than a pedicure. Get the pedicure too. But in order to figure out how to stay cool in these situations, we need to figure out what makes us hot, and that is triggers. So before we start talking about our triggers, we are going to take 3 deep breaths so we can bring ourselves together and get our brains ready to learn. So pick up your piece of pizza, smell it, smells so good. Take a deep breath in as you smell that pizza, push your belly out. And then as you exhale, because that pizza's hot, blow on it. Pull your belly in. Let your shoulders loosen up. Breathe in deep. Smell that pizza. On your exhale, pulling that belly in, that slow, slow breath out. Let your jaw release. Right? Do it one more time. Breathe in deep. Fill up. Breathe out slow. Cool that piece of pizza off. Right? Let your face soften. Let your hands drop into your lap. So raise your hand if you'd had your buttons pushed by an adult or a child. You might look at this visual and just immediately identify some things that send you and take your clacker from 0 to 100 just like that, right? A trigger. We all have people, small people and big people, that push our buttons. Sometimes it looks like this. Right? So we've had those days or those people or those kiddos in our life that is what it feels like often, right? So we're going to talk about triggers, but we can't talk about that without touching on the power perception. The power perception states that nobody can make me angry without my permission. Our perception of an experience is what creates the feelings about it. Our perception of an experience creates the feelings about it. That's why you and I could be in a classroom together. It could be very, very, very loud. You may not care or even be phased in the slightest that the room is loud. I might have an unexpected or big response and be very upset about the loud noises because our perception, we're having the same event in front of us, but our perception of the event is different and it's creating different feelings for each of us, right? You've seen a teacher or been a teacher who yells because everybody's yelling, right? It's triggered. It's a trigger. So we are the ones that want to be in charge, right? Everybody wants to be in charge. I love to be in charge, in the classroom, out of the classroom, right? I'm in charge of me. So when I'm in charge of me and accept that nobody can make me angry without my permission, that gives me a lot of power over my body, my brain, right? And my experience. It's the same way that if we really think about us trying to be in charge of anybody else, you can't make anybody do anything. Have you ever tried to make somebody do something? Yeah, me too. It doesn't work, right? That's because the only person I'm in charge of is me. I get to decide how I'm going to handle a situation. So this is where look what you made me do. Don't make me send you to the office. You're making me feel crazy, right? When we resort to this, when we resort to those things, saying those things, feeling those things, we're putting responsibility on somebody else for us. We send a message to the child, the person, the situation, that they're responsible for our upset when we are the only ones responsible for us. because upset is an inside job. So we all carry a mental model of how the world should work, how it should be, right? And our should is always the right should, right? How I think the world should work is definitely right versus how you think the world should work, right? We see the world not as it is, but through the lens of judgment about how we think it should be. When we look through that lens, it alters everything around us. And then when the people around us fail to meet our expectations, we become upset because the world didn't work out as we thought it should, right? This activates our emotional state. So think back to what you know about the brain or what you watched recently in a brain video. Emotional state is unconscious, right? So this is the same reason that a toddler is upset when we take a toy or a crayon, right, when they're coloring, because to them, this is what should be happening, in their world. What should be happening is I should be able to color until I'm done, and then here we come saying, no, it's time to clean up, we've got to go, and then we usually yank the thing out of their hand, right, because they're not cleaning up. But the upset is not caused by the other person, it's triggered by it. Upset is an inside job. So read this with me. Trigger thoughts distort the situation by making it seem bigger than it is, making children's behaviors seem deliberate. Have you ever felt like some itty bitty kid is doing something to you on purpose? Yes. Adults too, right? Push our buttons on purpose. So when we blame somebody else for our upset, we destroy the opportunity to make safety in our classroom. Because anytime we try to make someone else feel responsible for our upset, we are creating an unsafe situation, and certainly difficult to be connected to someone who's blaming you for what's happening inside of them, right? Trigger thoughts blind us to underlying information. If I stay in my trigger thought, all I can see is the tip of the iceberg, right? The part that is above the water, which is a judgment, right? This child is so mean and no kids ever want to play with them. This is never going to stop. Nobody ever comes and helps. This is just the way that it is. This sucks, right? When we get stuck there, when we get stuck in that trigger thought, because we can't necessarily, we're not going to go through this little video today in this coaching session that you're in and just be like, oh, figured out my triggers and they don't trigger me anymore. We're going to learn how to manage our triggers. Identifying them is a great first step. But when we can identify our triggers and then learn what to do, we can see this underlying stuff like, oh, the child can make eye contact. And I'm going to go back to what I know about the brain. He's making eye contact with me. He's not in survival state. He's emotional state. And here's what I know how to do to help him in emotional state, right? Sometimes I might be able to recognize when I'm outside of my trigger thought that this always happens during play. This always happens during center time. Man, maybe this kid is overstimulated by the noise, by the light. Maybe they don't know how to ask for a turn and they're missing a skill that I can help with. Sometimes what I can recognize is, oh, the other kids don't care if he bumps into them. I do. Like, it triggers me that this child asks in this way, but it's not bothering anybody else. So maybe this is about me instead of the child, right? So there are three main categories of trigger thoughts. The first one is assumed intent. This is when we think that the child is deliberately misbehaving to upset us, to make trouble in the classroom or another student. And man, I want you to think back to emotional state. It's unconscious, right? And think about brain development. Before the age of 8, there is no inner speech. So no child in your 0 to 8 classroom, and remember, 8 is not a hard, fast line that they can just have control of everything after 8. But without that inner voice, they are not having a conversation inside their head that says, man, I cannot stand this teacher. And you know what I'm going to do to her today? I'm going to do this and this and this because it will make her miserable. And I love that, right? Assumed intent. Magnification. In the teacher's mind, the situation is much worse than it is. So We had a teacher one time who was triggered by, who had their own experience with bullying. And so was very triggered by hitting. Now, nobody likes hitting. Nobody wants to be hit. You know, little kids hit. It's not that nobody cares, but this particular staff, when hitting happened and hurting happened in the classroom, which was typical in a 3-year-old classroom, she was triggered because of that experience that she had when she was growing up. So every time a child hurt another child, she magnified it to bullying. And again, this doesn't mean we let things go, but when we get wrapped up in this trigger thought, and we magnify it and make it much bigger than it is, it blinds us to be able to see the underlying issues so we can figure out how to help. And then there's labeling. This is when we use negative or derogatory words to describe a child or their behavior, like nobody wants to play with him because he's so rough, and we are typically saying it in front of the kid. Man, if we see a child's behavior and immediately say they need an evaluation, right? And we say that enough, we say it to everybody, we say it in front of the kid, that doesn't feel great. And also, if I'm stuck in that idea, if I've made that judgment and I'm stuck in that idea, then I'm going to miss out on all that underlying information that might help me come up with a plan to help the child. So remember, in our emotional state, right? So a trigger thought brings us to our emotional state. And our emotional state is unconscious. And that's where it lives our memories, right? That's where the bullying and how it felt to be bullied lived in that staff person's brain. This is where my memories of being yelled at by my uncle while I was growing up live here. So when I hear an adult yelling at a child, I am triggered into my emotional state, and that memory pulls up and I can feel it. And then I'm going to react quick to it if I don't catch it. Right. So inside that emotional state, when we're triggered, it brings us to our playlist. So remember that playlist that somebody else wrote for you when you were growing up, that has such unhelpful things in it, such as you are not enough, and you're lazy. Sit down. You can't do anything right. Right? We have those terrible songs on our playlist from when we were growing up that still affect us so much today when we're triggered. So we have a trigger thought that activates our playlist, and then there comes that false message, right? Shut up, sit down, you're not enough. And here comes the uncomfortable sensations, right? Whatever that might feel like for you, I have a physical reaction inside my body. And then here comes that automatic reaction. I'm ready to fight, right? So a trigger for me is people taking credit for my work. When that happens and I am triggered, it activates my playlist. And those false messages start coming. And then I do feel uncomfortable, right? My cheeks get hot. My stomach might get upset. I might have tension in my shoulders. And then my automatic reaction is that I'm going to march around and I'm going to find somebody and I'm going to complain and complain and complain, or I'm going to get stuck in a loop of ruminating about how this happened to me again, or I'm going to completely shut down and not want to talk to anybody, right? Because I have had it. So I get stuck when I'm triggered in this very unhelpful cycle. So here's what's next for you. You are going to pause, pull out your worksheet, and do the first part where you are going to just take a moment to identify your triggers. You might have done this exercise before, so go ahead and check them off. Take the time that you need to examine that, and then have a conversation with whoever you are with, if you're willing to share what your triggers are, and then any information that comes up for you in that, and then come back. So, after you've examined those triggers together and identified some of yours, what behaviors in your classroom are explained by your triggers? So, in a moment, you're going to hit pause again and go to this next section because I want you to jot down some things that you're struggling with in your classroom. And we all have struggles in our classroom. If you are brand new and haven't had a lot of time in the classroom, then think about things in your past that are very difficult, maybe with your own children or in a childcare program that you might have worked before. What are some things that are difficult for you to handle in the classroom? And once you've done that, look at your list of triggers. Can you match any of those up? Do any of them make a little more sense? One staff person that was going through this process identified that people trying to be the center of attention, children or adults trying to be the center of attention, which in a classroom might look like this kid standing on the shelf and smiling, right? Laughing. Um, uh, she identified that that was a trigger for her. And then through this process, she said that her dad used to yell at them for showing off, right? So when she was little, doing something like that was showing off, or doing anything performative was showing off, right? She got in trouble for that, which created some shame and some bad feelings about it, right? In that internal playlist, don't be a show off. So when a behavior comes in front of her, like a child standing on a table laughing, looking for attention and connection, she's triggered by that. And it brings her right back to that 9-year-old feeling, unconscious, right? Emotional state, brings us back to how we felt scared or shamed when we got in trouble from our dad for being a show off. So it's not about the child standing on the shelf laughing. It's about the trigger and the feeling that comes up, right? In our emotional state, we don't have a ton of helpful stuff to offer anybody, including ourselves. It can feel like the child's behavior has made you emotional, but in reality, the child's behavior triggered your emotions. So go ahead and pause and work through that classroom stuff and whatever comes up for you, and then come back. Another trigger that we need to consider, especially when we're thinking about our classrooms, because they can be overwhelming anyway, are environmental triggers. So think about some things. There may be none, there may be several in your environment that can be triggering for you. Is it when a child is rolling around on the carpet while you're trying to read a story? Is it being touched a lot? Is it lights? So overhead lights are a trigger of mine. And when we have environmental triggers, it can also suck up all of our brain's attention and make it difficult for us to do other things. It makes us feel like inside, not safe, and can also trigger those lower brain states. So whining and lying triggers for me, but so are overhead lights and clutter. It makes it very difficult for me to stay regulated and in my executive state in an environment that's very bright or cluttered. So pause and think about what some of your environmental triggers might be. All right. So identifying our triggers is a very powerful first step. I wish it was enough to just stop it. So imagine, if you will, with me, that well, you don't have to imagine that you're in the bathtub necessarily, but you know, if you fart in the bathtub, the bubble's coming up. There's nothing you can do to stop it from happening. Okay. Um, those are our emotions, right? You're not going to stop it from happening. But here's the thing. If you're in the bathtub and you start to recognize at some point what your body feels like, your body's going to give you a signal before you fart in the bathtub. right? If you can recognize that feeling, if you can identify it, if you can recognize it and learn all about it, then when I have that feeling, I can make a plan. I'm not going to stop the emotion. I'm not going to stop that bubble from forming and coming up, but I might be able to do something. I can turn the water on really hard so nobody hears it. I can stand up out of the bathtub real quick so it doesn't happen. I can make a plan. I have some choices when I can recognize what it feels like. So you're going to pause again, going back to your worksheet, and do some thinking about what your triggers feel like. Only when we can identify what it feels like and what's going on can we tame it. So as you work on this checklist together and think about where you feel it, I also want you to flip it over and go to this little person body on there and mark, where do you feel it. When I'm triggered by certain things, I will ruminate over it. I'll have conversations in my head. I will be driving home and I will be having a conversation in my head about what I wish I would have said and what I can and blah, 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 right? I know you've done that too, right? And, tension in my shoulders is a big one for me, is this. So I know what it feels like in my body when I'm triggered. I feel it here, right? I might feel it a little like here, tension. So I want you to take some time and think about what it feels like when you're triggered and where you feel it in your body. And this will be the end of our video. So as you work with the people around you, talk this out. If you're comfortable sharing, then share it. When you can start to name it, then you can start to tame it. So the next time we're together, we're going to talk about active calming so we can figure out what to do when we're triggered. But until then, take this information that you've just discovered about yourself and pay attention to yourself over this next period of time. So that's the homework, is to notice, not judge, how often you feel triggered, right? So this isn't about make a tally list and feel really bad about how many times you're triggered in the classroom. Just notice how often you're triggered in the classroom and where does it relate back to the information that you found. Okay, I'm wishing you well.